Welcome back to the prepping for NaNoWriMo, or the BEANO, which is short for Better National Novel Writing Month, which is a mouthful, so that's where we're saying BEANO, because it's just more fun to say. Anyway, so to recap kind of what we did in part one, I kind of set up the beginnings of what I needed to write a novel, which were the characters, the world, and the plot. And what I've done since then is I have gathered names, which I've got them here, and then I've kind of given my characters names. So I've given my characters names. And for Cinderella, I found Astoria like first. That was one of the first names that I put on the list for her or some female character, and that's just the one that has just kind of stuck. So that is her name. Her name is Astoria, and we're going to call her Tor for short. Or her friends are going to call her Tor. So I've gotten my names. I've given my characters names. And I've also got the name of the city that they're in, which I've named Silverdale. And then we're going to have that be like just like their silver mines or silversmiths. It's called the City of Silver, the Silver City. That's kind of what it's known for. That's their big industry is silver. So there's going to be a lot of silver. And I've named the king. The prince has got a name. I've named him Holland. I like that name. It's just a very classy name, and that I'm sure it has many things to do with the Darker Shade of Magic series, but alas, here we are. And then another thing that I did was I continually thought about the plot points that I had made for myself, which is like the beginning. And one thing that I did think of, which I know this block of text here looks very intimidating. It's, well, to me, it's not because I wrote it, but basically what I thought of was Cinderella needs a motive, right? And so her motive is going to be revenge because I like the motivation of revenge. I don't know, it just adds a nice little layer to everything. And so she wants motivation, or she has her motivation is to kill the prince. And so why does she have motivation to kill the prince? What has the prince done to her? And so my brain blast was that her father was murdered by bandits, and later we figure out that those or they weren't. Hold on. Let me back up. Her father, Cinderella's dad, Astoria's father, was killed by bandits who were disguised as royal guards or royal soldiers or some kind of soldiers that wore the uniform of the king. So she thinks, because she was young when this happened, she thinks that the king ordered the murder of her father. So she wants revenge on the king and thus also the prince. Later, she's going to find out, like in like Act 3, that her stepmother orchestrated this whole thing to make it look like the king wanted her dead, and she was also supposed to die, but then she didn't, which is why her stepmother doesn't like her. Mouthful, right? Take a breath. Don't forget to breathe when you're outlining. And so that was going to be like either my prologue or my chapter 1, depending on how I feel when I get in there. And this is just basically outlining this. Because I had like that scene of like Cinderella survives because she is covered in her father's blood. And so the bandits think she's also dead because she's not moving, so they leave her alone. And then she is the sole survivor in this massacre. And that's going to haunt her for the rest of her life, right? That's going to be her. Well, there's a word there. Like her moment that's going to haunt her, that drives her to get revenge for her dad that she loves so much, that was killed for reasons she doesn't understand. And then like because she survives, her stepmother is mad because she was also supposed to die, so she kind of pushes her into like her guild of assassins that she's got to kind of give her a right here. Her stepmother promises to give her guidance and a place to belong and a purpose because she doesn't know what else to do with her because she didn't want her to begin with. She just wanted her father's money. And of course, Cinderella agrees because she doesn't know what else to do. Because in her young mind, her stepmother has just saved her from this horrendous fate. Like, her father and all of his men were massacred, and she's terrified. She's traumatized, and her stepmother swoops in and saves her. Of course, later on, Cinderella will realize that is not really what happened. That her stepmother is really, cunning and conniving and mean. I've got water on to boil for coffee, so if I step away, that's what I'm doing. I'm making some coffee. And then years later, Cinderella is one of her stepmom's assassins. She's not, I don't know if I want to make her like the best assassin, but she's an assassin. I know. So she gets the contract to kill the prince, right? And this is basically outlining that. Like she's in a room, like on like the attic of a building, blah blah blah. She kills the decoy thinking it was the prince and is kind of outlining how she gets away. Like she pretends to be like a maid in a house. So when like the guards come in, because that's where the assassin was aiming at, they don't suspect her at first. Because she's just a sweet little girl. She's going to use that to her advantage. However, but she fails to kill the prince as she was assigned to do. So she doesn't want to make her stepmother mad. So she's like, wait, I've got another plan. I've got another plan, which is to infiltrate the ball scene, which I don't know if the ball is going to be like the midpoint or like a little further in from the midpoint. I haven't gotten that far yet. Then, of course, they start to fall for each other. And then, like, the ending I got to, which is when they are at the ball, she has an opportunity to kill him, and she doesn't. And so she kind of goes through that whole reflective scene that characters, they have to go through where they question everything that they have thought. It's them basically learning like the life lesson. And then she ends up going back to her stepmother for some reason. It's still really unclear. And she tells her stepmom everything. And then like she somehow finds out that her stepmom was behind everything and is most likely tricking her into doing this, and she doesn't want to kill the prince anymore because she finds out they are actually kind of good people and they're the best people to be in charge right now. And then this is kind of leads into the scene where she gets locked in the basement or something, and the stepmom tells her, "Oh yeah, by the way, I killed your dad too." And then Cinderella's like, "Ah!" The scene beat in Save the Cat, which is like the what is it called? Dark Night of the Soul, which is they have hit rock bottom. And that's going to be her rock bottom. That is going to be her Dark Night of the Soul, which leads into her climbing out of it to save the prince from her stepmother's nefarious plan. Which, okay, so I've gotten all of that. That is what I have been thinking about, has been kind of churning up here for the past, 2 weeks since I did that first video. Really longer than that, but I kind of made myself think about it. And since I have all those plot points, that leads me into this. It's still an outline, but it takes all of those plot points that I had been thinking about and it puts them into an outline form. Like this is just giving a little bit more detail. Young Cinderella's traveling through the mountains with her father. Soldiers attack, blah blah blah. And there's kind of everything that I had just done, I outlined a little bit more. And that's how I write. I know there are some people who go out of order when they write, like they know that this big scene is going to happen over here, so they write that big scene first, or they write the midpoint first, or they write the Dark Night of the Soul first. I can't do that. My brain does not work that way. I have to start at the beginning and I have to go all the way through in a chronological linear order. And that's okay. And it's okay if you write out of order too. It's just whatever helps you get to point A to point B and back again, whatever. So then after I've got kind of this up here kind of outline where it's basically telling me telling me what is happening in the story. This happens, this happens, this happens. I move into basically draft 0, also known as the rough draft. You're starting at the bottom, right? So this is going to be me taking that outline, which I've copied and pasted here. And I am going to be basically taking that and putting it into story form, if that makes any kind of sense. And I thought about today, like instead of moving on and like trying to outline more, just going right into rough draft mode and doing like a little writing sprint. Because now I have my names. I've got a basic plot. I've got Cinderella's motivation. I've got her stepmother's motivation. And I've got the big bad villain. Yes, I've given him a name. And for me, there's only so much I can do in this stage. I really need to step into like the draft zero stage, the rough drafting stage, where you really kind of just let the story go. There have been books in the past where I've moved into rough draft mode and the story has changed. Because as I'm writing, as I'm exploring these characters and getting them on the page together and letting them make friends on the page, basically, they have changed my story for me. Sometimes for the better. Sometimes, well, I can't think of any example where it was for the worst. So that is basically what I've done for the past 2 weeks. I haven't actually written anything. I have been thinking about it. I have been trying to put all these puzzle pieces together in my brain to form a cohesive plot. As of right now, I've got all these plot points because I've got my beginning where the carriage is attacked and she becomes the assassin. I've got my midpoint, which may or may not be the ball. I don't know. And again, like I don't know where that's going to fall chronologically or if like as I'm writing something else is going to happen. So that's another reason just to jump right into the rough drafting stage just to see what I have and what I need and what just kind of flows as I go. But I'm going to check on my coffee and come back with a fresh cup of delicious hot coffee. I have got my coffee. I have opened a window because it's actually really warm in here and it's really, really nice outside. But and I live out in the middle of nowhere, so hopefully there's not gonna be a lot of ambient sounds. If someone starts mowing, I'll close it. Mm. Oh, what was I doing? Where was I at? So you take breaks and then you don't have a clue where you were. Some writing advice for people who have never written a book or they've tried to write a book and it didn't work out and they want to but they don't know where to start and it's overwhelming. My best advice to anyone who wants to write a book and they find it intimidating is that it I mean it is a lot and it is an undertaking, but like where I'm at in this one, like the rough draft stage, it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be plenty of imperfections. There's going to be things I change. There's going to be elements that aren't in the rough draft that I end up adding in later. I might do an entire draft just to like figure out what the magic system is. And that's okay. Like especially like on like a writing level. It's okay to use adverbs or the word said in your dialogue tags or over describe things or describe the weather too much. Like this is not the time to focus on like writing level things. Like we are focusing for like the rough draft for the outlining. We are focusing on the big picture, the plot, the story, the meat of the story, not like line editing type things like this sounds repetitive of this paragraph. Like don't worry about that right now. Do not worry about that right now. Your rough draft is not going to be highly marketable and readable straight out the gate, all right? And that's perfectly fine. I don't I don't think I would trust anyone who said that their rough draft was publishable. I don't think I would trust that cuz I don't know about that. But anyway, so this is the steps that I have taken in like the past week. And I know I was going to like like the reason I was doing these prep videos so everyone could see like how I get to where I need to be in order to write a rough draft. But like these first like the first steps of like just trying to figure out everything, it's a lot easier to like hold on, I'm trying to scroll up faster than I'm talking, or I'm trying to talk faster than I can scroll. That was almost a burp. That's why that word scroll sounded real weird. This is a lot easier. Like this type of thing here, it's a lot easier to invite people into to see because it's mostly just bullet points other than like trying to figure out this because this is more of me thinking and thinking about the story while I'm doing other things. Be doing something completely different and then all of a sudden I see a name somewhere, either for a person or like on something or on the side of a book spine or something and be like, that's a good name. And this part is a lot harder to invite people into the journey because it would be mostly just me sitting and staring at the wall, me trying to think of scenes and stuff like that. And then me taking all of those bullet points of scenes and putting them into this very rough outline. And then me taking that very rough outline and moving into draft zero and turning that outline into story format, if that makes sense. I'm sure none of this makes sense. And it's all just like people going, what is she talking about? Which is fine. This is the world of authors. This is how I write books. This is how people write books. This is fine. There's a reason. I don't know where I was going with that thought. But there's that stereotype out there that writers and authors are primarily solitary beings. We are in these little dark corners like little gremlins, like typing it away on our keyboard by ourselves. The reason that stereotype persists is because it's mostly true. Like, yes, you have those authors that go out to their local coffee shops and write books while wearing those little tweed jackets with elbow patches, and they've got their whole little author aesthetic going. But for most authors that I have met and kind of talked to about this, mostly on social media because I don't have any real life author friends, are like, no, I am like sitting in my room while somebody else is watching TV on the other side of the room in like a sweatshirt that I've worn for 3 or 4 days. My hair is dirty. And like you're sitting on the couch with a blanket over your shoulders with your laptop propped up on your knees typing away. Like it's not this glamorous author core lifestyle. Like I'm just sitting in a corner of like I call it my office space. It's just a bedroom that's not in use anymore that I have kind of taken as my little office space. But I also have like a chair and a TV over there that somebody could come in and watch TV if they wanted to or play games because that's where all my consoles are. So there's not really this aesthetic that you have to be an author. You just have to have a drive to write. Because it was on TikTok this past week. Maybe it was on Threads. Might have been on Threads. I think it was on Threads. But anyway, we were talking about the two types of writers. You have your writers who write because otherwise they would just explode, which is me. We write because we enjoy the act of writing. We enjoy the act of creation. And then you have the writers who write because they want to be the next Twilight or the next Hunger Games or the next Harry Potter or next what have you. They want to be famous. They want to sell a book and be super rich. I'm not saying you can't be a writer and be rich, but for the most part, 99% of authors out there are not making the big bucks. And that's okay. I would recommend anyone who wants to write a book or they think they might want to write a book, don't write a book because you think you're going to, be the next Harry Potter or like be the next Lord of the Rings or whatever. Don't focus solely on being an author. Like you have to enjoy writing. You have to enjoy the act of creation. You have to enjoy reading books. Because if you don't, why else are you doing it? So you have to write because you enjoy it. Like, yes, I'm probably going to be a little bit burnt out after this novel challenge, like I was and have been every single time I've done it. But I'm still going to enjoy it. Like, I'm not going to force myself to write just so I can get X amount of words in X amount of days. If I don't feel like writing, I'm not going to. Like, if I didn't write at all, I would spontaneously combust. That is a scientific fact. And I write because I enjoy it, because I love it, because I love the act of creation. And yes, I have made strides to become a better writer, to become a better author of like story craft and like character creation, because you can get better at all of those things. Like writing, like any other skill, is a skill. You can have like a natural affinity for it, but anybody can pick it up and learn. You can be naturally good at something, and you can also learn to be good at something. This has gone on in a different tangent than what I wanted it to be. I think I'm going to wrap part 2 here because I don't think there really needs to be a part 3 because I have done what I set out to do with my prep, which is get my characters, get the basis of my plot, and figure out my world building a little bit. Which, I don't even think I put that in here, but I think I settled on like just like your regular high fantasy setting. Just, I don't know, it's just what I felt like at the time. And if I get into it and feel like it needs to be a little bit more gaslamp or whatever, I'll focus on that, as we come to it, as I come to it. As I hit the obstacles that I didn't know were there, I will worry about them then. So thank you for tagging along on my NaNo prep. I will be doing some writing sprints and weekly check-ins. Just let you know how I've done. And if you want to let me know how you've done in the comments, that's perfectly fine. I would love to connect with more writers across the board on all social media because they say it's a writing challenge, and that's true. It is a challenge. I mean, writing a novel, period, is hard, especially if you've never done it or if you've only done it a few times. Like, I'm able to throw this outline together relatively quickly because I've written 20 some odd novels now. And by written, I mean gone through all of these steps so many times that I know exactly what I need, what I don't need in order to get to that rough draft stage, and what I usually figure out during the rough draft. So I kind of know how my writing process is and what I need. And that's something that I think every writer, every writer, just has to figure out on their own time. So thanks for tagging along. I do hope you stick around for the rest of my NaNoWriMo nonsense here, and I hope to see you then. One thing I forgot to mention here is how I come up with all my names. There's not really a trick to it. I save names, right? I have an entire Excel spreadsheet somewhere on my computer full of names. Every time I see a name that I'm like, ooh, that's a cool name, I will put it in my phone. I have a little note thing on my phone that I put names onto, and then every once in a while I'll take all those names and put them onto that spreadsheet. And then I will keep that spreadsheet. And when I use a name, I will actually go in and like do the little thing where you can put a line through it. So that way I know I've used that name and not to use it again. And I don't have it just for like names of people, but I have it for places, cool proper nouns that I could use. And it is incredibly handy for any author to have some kind of name sheet, book thing somewhere. Like baby name websites are your friend. There are several websites out there that help you come up with names for like fantasy oriented things, but I personally have never really liked any of the names that they have given me. They always feel super like generic Dungeons and Dragons kind of names, and I'm just not a huge fan because I don't know how like many other people are going into that same website and pulling out names. But there's also a lot of like name list things on oh, what is it called? Pinterest. That's what it is. And I will save those into a folder specifically like named like writing tips, I think is what it is. But it has a lot of like names, like lists of names that are royalty names or gothic names or dark academia names or like names like that. And for a lot of these names, I just like went through and I scrolled through all of those saved pins of names and just took the ones that I liked that kind of had the feel of this high fantasy world that I was going for. And it's probably going to be just like your typical like medieval. Oh man, medieval. That's the word I wanted to. That is not the word that came out of my mouth at first, but that's the word that I wanted. The basic medieval European style high fantasy, just because that's the world that I know best. And when you start trying to pull in like fantasy based on other cultures, unless you are a part of that culture and you're eyeball deep in that culture, or you have someone close to you that is eyeball deep in that culture, I don't recommend using another culture that you are not familiar with to write your fantasy on, because it gets into that realm that you don't want to be in, where you could be like appropriating a culture that's not yours. Now that doesn't mean you can't. You just have to become an expert in that culture. And by expert, I mean do a lot of research, get like sensitivity readers and all that fun stuff. Because while I do like fantasy based on like non-European culture, the European fantasy style will always be my favorite, I think, just because it's what I came into, it's what I like, and it's just near and dear to me. That's just is what I gravitate toward.